Hi, this is Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, and you're listening to BriefingsDirect. Our next business analytics trends discussion explores the impact of dispersed data in a multi-cloud world. Gaining control over far-flung and disparate data has been a decades-old struggle, but now as hybrid and public clouds join the mix of legacy and distributed digital architectures, new ways of thinking are demanded. Comprehensive analysis of all the relevant data is ever going to become practical. Stay with us now as we examine the latest strategies for making the best use of data integration, data catalogs and indices, as well as highly portable data analytics platforms. To learn more about closing the analysis gap between data and multiple and most probably changeable cloud models, we're now joined by Mike Potter, Chief Technology Officer at Qlik. Welcome, Mike.
Hi there. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. Mike, businesses are adopting cloud computing for very good reasons. The growth over the past decade has been strong and accelerating. What have been some of the perhaps, if not unintentional, complicating factors for gaining a comprehensive data analysis strategy amid all of this cloud computing complexity?
Well, I think the biggest thing is recognizing the fact that it's all about where data lives and where it's been created. And so, obviously, historically, most data has been generated on-premise, and so there's a strong pull there. But you're seeing more and more cases now where data is born in the cloud, spends its whole lifetime in the cloud. And so now the use cases are different because you have a combination of those two worlds, on-premise and cloud. And to add further complexity, what you're seeing is now data being born in different cloud providers. And so not only are you dealing with the fact that you may have some data in legacy systems on-premise, but you may have to reconcile the fact that you got data in Amazon, Google, or Microsoft. And so our whole strategy around our multi-cloud architecture, our hybrid cloud architecture, is really about being able to deploy Qlik where the data lives and allow you to leave the data where it is, but give you options so that if you need to move the data, we can support the use cases on-premise to cloud or across cloud providers.
And you haven't just put on the patina of cloud first or SaaS first. You really have re-architected and repositioned a lot of what your products and technologies do. So tell us a little bit about the on-ramp, if you will, of being a SaaS first, and then more about how you're able to get into the clouds themselves.
Well, we started our journey about 2.5 years ago where we started converting our monolith architecture into a microservices-based architecture. And that journey was, it struck to the core of the whole product. The Qlik's heritage was a Windows architecture, server architecture. We had to rethink a lot of things. And so as part of that, we took advantage and took a big bet about a year and a half ago on containerization using Docker and Kubernetes. And that's really paid off for us. And it's put us ahead of the technology curve in many respects, because when we did our initial release of our multi-cloud product back in June last year, I'd have conversations with customers who didn't know what Kubernetes was. One of the most interesting conversations I had was an enterprise customer that actually had an infrastructure team who had set up an environment to provision Kubernetes cluster environments, but we were only the second vendor that had one. And so we were ahead of the game quite a bit.
And for those folks who might not be entirely familiar with Kubernetes, what is being in a containerized platform that can go cross-cloud get for you? How does that allow you to be a service on top of the service, if you will?
Well, the single biggest thing is that it allows you to scale and manage workloads at a much finer grain of detail through auto-scaling capabilities provided by orchestration environments like Kubernetes. More importantly, what it does is it allows you to manage your costs. One of the biggest advantages of a microservice-based architecture is that you can scale up and scale down to a much finer grain. Most on-premise server-based monolith architectures, customers have to buy infrastructure for peak levels, right, of workload. What we can do is scale up and scale down those workloads basically on the fly, and giving them a lot more control over their infrastructure budget and give them an ability to meet the needs of their customers when they need it.
Another aspect of the cloud evolution of the past decade is that no one enterprise is like any other. They've all adopted cloud in a different way. They've all transitioned from their own legacy to distributed in their own way. Is there now an opportunity for what Qlik is providing on the analytics side, the advantage of being able to deal with any of those different topologies, enterprise by enterprise, but get them to a more total data strategy?
Yeah, I think so. I think the thing that we want to focus on is rather than dictate the cloud strategy, which is often the choice of our competitors, we want to be able to support your cloud strategy as you need it. We recognize the fact that the customer may not want to be on just one cloud provider. They don't want to lock themselves in. And so we need to accommodate that. We need to accommodate the fact that there may be very valid reasons why they are regionalized from a data sovereignty perspective. We want to be able to accommodate that. We need to be able to accommodate the fact that there will always be on-premise requirements and accommodate that. And so the reality is for the next little while, you're not going to see so much a convergence around cloud providers as you are going to be around microservice architectures, containers, and the way they're managed and orchestrated.
And there's another variable, and there will probably be more variables over the next couple of years, and that's the edge. So we have, in a sense, a uncharted, immature environment at the edge, but we're hearing that a private cloud at the edge is entirely feasible. Again, perhaps containers working there. How does what you're doing at Qlik, anticipating the edge computing issue that has to also jive with the cloud computing issue, pan out? Is that something you're planning on?
Yeah, most definitely. In fact, one of the key features of our platform architecture is not only can we run on premise or in the cloud, any cloud at scale, but we can actually run on an edge device. We can take our core analytic engine and deploy it on a device or a machine that is running at the edge, and really enable a new opportunity, which is about taking analytics itself to the edge. A lot of IoT implementations are really geared towards collecting data at the sensor, transferring it to a central location to be processed, analyzed there. What we want to do is actually push the analytics problem out to the edge so that the analytic data feeds can be processed at the edge, and then only the analytic events be transmitted back for central processing, which obviously has a huge impact from a data scale perspective. But more importantly, what it does is it creates a new opportunity to have the analytic context be very immediate in the field where the actual point of occurrence is. So if you're sitting there on a sensor and you're doing analytics on the sensor, not only can you benefit the vehicle the sensor's sitting in, but now you can actually do that as well as send the analytic data back to the central point where it can be analyzed as well.
I'm sure this wasn't intentional, but it seems very auspicious that the way that Qlik goes about things with the catalog, indexing, abstracting out the information about what the data is and where it resides and how it can now be used in analytics works really well in an edge environment.
Most definitely. And so our entire data strategy is interlinked with our architectural strategy in that respect, yes.
For organizations that recognize that analytics and being data-driven and analytically proficient across their organization is absolutely the way of the future, it seems to me that it makes sense for them not to seed that core competency of being good at analytics into a cloud provider or to a vendor or to even an SI, but to recognize that the people, process, tribal knowledge about analytics is essential for them. Do you agree with that, and how does Qlik's strategy align with keeping the core competency of analytics of, by, and for each and every enterprise?
Well, I think we've recognized the fact that analytics is a specialization organizationally within all of our customers, and that's not going to go away. I think what we want to do is parlay that into a broader discussion. So our focus is moving to enabling three key strategies now. It's about enabling the analytics strategy as we always have, but broadening the conversation to enabling the data strategy, and more importantly, closing that gap, that organizational gap, the technological gap, and the priority gap of creating an integrated data and analytics strategy. And by doing that, I think we can create basically what I would describe as a raw-to-ready analytics platform that's based on trust, because we own the process of the data from source to analysis. And what that does, I think, is not only make the analytics better, but it also, I think, promotes the third part of our strategy, which is around data literacy, which is really about creating a trusted environment in which people can interact with their data, do the analysis that they want to do without having to be data scientists or data experts. And so owning that whole end-to-end, I think, is something that we are striving to reach.
As we've seen in other technology maturation trend curves, applying automation to the problem frees up the larger democratization process, that more people can consume these services. How does automation work in the next few years when it comes to analytics? Are we going to start to see more artificial intelligence, augmented intelligence applied to the problem of automating the act of intelligence?
So the short answer to that question is automating those environments it's an inevitability, not only from the standpoint of how the data is collected, but how the data is pushed through a data operations process, and more importantly, how it's enabled on the other end by embedding artificial and machine learning techniques all the way along that value chain, from the point of source to the point of consumption.
The idea then of bots, of automation, how integral is that to the maturation of what you're doing? I guess I'm still driving at how does AI play a role in the automation of more data, indices, more ability to leverage data across the entire organization?
I'm going to try it and answer it this way. I think that the role and the nature in which we perform analytics with an analytics system is going to evolve. It's going to be more conversational in nature, and it's less going to be about just consuming a dashboard and looking for an insight and a visualization. The analytics system itself will be an active member of that process, where the conversation is not only with the analytics system, but the analytics system itself can initiate the conversation by identifying insights based on context and based on other feeds that it gets from a collective intelligence of the people you work with or the people you know who are involved in the process themselves.
Now, this question goes off the beaten track a little bit. I've been at some recent events where robotic process automation has been a key topic. And it seems to me that there's this welling opportunity to use AI also in the consumption as well as the delivery there. But it's a separate track from what's going on with BI and analytics and the traditional data warehouse approach. Do you see an opportunity for what's going on with AI and use of RPA and AI and what you're all doing with the analytics and data assimilation problem coming together? That is to say, would a robotic process be able to leverage analytic information that's being generated and vice versa?
Yeah, I think it gets back to this idea of pushing analytics to the edge, because an edge isn't just a device-level integration. It could be at the edge of a process. It could be at the edge of not only a human process, but an automated business process. And I think that the notion of being able to embed analytics deep into those processes is already being done. Process analytics is an important field, but I think the idea is that by realizing the fact that analytics it's in service of the process as opposed to the other way around. And so where I think the world is getting to is away from analytics being a separate activity done by a separate group and a separate act. It is as commonplace as getting a text message.
For the organization to get to that nirvana of total analytics as a common strategy with lots of different tactical approaches, it seems to me that this needs to be part and parcel of what the IT organization is doing with its full stack architecture and evolution. So AI ops and data ops perhaps also getting closer over time. How does data ops, in your thinking, relate to what the larger IT enterprise architects are doing, and why should they be thinking about data more?
Yeah, it's great. That's a really good question. From my perspective, when I get a chance to talk to data teams, I ask a simple question. You have this data lake. Is it meeting the analytic requirements of your organization? And often I don't get very good answers. And a big reason why that happens is because what motivates and prioritizes the data team is really the storage and management of data, not necessarily analytics. And often those priorities conflict with the priorities of the analytics team. And so what we're trying to do with this integrated data and analytics strategy that I described a few minutes ago is really about creating data pipelines optimized for analytics. Data operations optimized for analytics. And our investments and our acquisitions in Attunity and Podium are really about taking that process and focusing on the raw-to-ready part of that data operations.
Mike, we've been talking at a fairly abstract level, but to go to some concrete examples, are you familiar with any examples or use cases where there are bleeding-edge organizations that recognize the relationship that's intrinsic between data ops and enterprise architecture, and that analytics is core and fundamental and is not a bolt-on activity? Could you describe some examples or use cases where they get it and what it gets for them?
I could cite several of the meetings I've had this afternoon on that fact. The most recent one is a very large enterprise customer, deals in the area of medical devices and things like that. What they've realized is, there is an essential need to be able to have an integrated strategy. And one of the challenges they have, is like most organizations, is how do you not only overcome the technology part of it, but the organizational, cultural, and change management aspects of it as well. But the recognition is always there, which is these organizations suffer from a need versus have problem. The business has a need of data. IT has data. And if you intersect them, how much of it is actually a fit? How much data does IT have that isn't needed? How much of the need is unfulfilled by IT? And that's really the problem you need to close on.
For businesses, they need to be thinking at the C-suite level, of course, about outcomes. Is there some examples where you can show and tie together those large strategic business outcomes back to this fundamental total approach, holistic approach to data, to enterprise architecture, and to data ops?
Yeah, so I think the biggest ones I think is really about an end-to-end governance of data for analytics, the ability to understand where the data came from, build trust in the data inside the organization so that decisions can be made, and that decision has some traceability back to results. I think the other aspect of it is by building an integrated system, there's a total cost of ownership opportunity because you're not expending energy managing data that isn't relevant to actually adding value to the organization. And so you can make a lot more intelligent choices about how you use data and how you actually measure the impact that data can have.
And on the topic of data literacy, how do you see the behavior of an organization, the culture of an organization shifting when the IT department does its job, when the data analysis troops do their job? What do we need to do to make the consumers of this a bit more savvy? How do we get the chicken and egg relationship between the services that provide analytics and the consumers to start a virtuous, positive adoption?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest puzzles that a lot of IT organizations suffer from is adoption and utilization. They build a lake and they don't know why people aren't using it. And for me, I think there's a couple elements to the problem. One is this notion of, call it data elitism. When you think about data literacy and you compare it to literacy in the industrial age, the people who had the books were the people who were rich, had the power, church, state, that kind of thing. And it wasn't until technology created through the printing press and created a democratization of literacy that you started to see interesting behavior. Those with the books, those with the power, tried to subvert reading in the general population, made it illegal. Some argue that the French Revolution was in part caused by literacy. If you flash forward this analogy to today in data literacy, you still have this same notion of elitism. Data is only allowed to be accessed by the senior levels of the organization. It can only be controlled by IT. Ironically, the most data enabled in an organization are typically the millennials or younger, but they're in the wrong part of the org chart to actually take advantage of that because they're not allowed to see the data that they could use to use their job. So I think the real opportunity from a democratization of data perspective is really understanding the value of data to every individual and then allowing that data be made available in a trusted environment. And that's where this end-to-end process becomes so important.
My last area of questioning is how do we make the economics of analytics an accelerant to that adoption and to the democratization of data? And I'll use another historical analogy, and that would be the Model T and assembly line, that they didn't sell Model Ts to nearly the degree they thought until they paid their own people enough to afford one. Is there a way of looking at that and saying, okay, we need to create an economic environment where they pay on demand, it's fit for purpose, it's consumption oriented, and that will also help perhaps accelerate the adoption of analytics as a total enterprise cultural activity?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thought. I think the consumerization of analytics is really a product of accessibility. It's a product of cost. I think when you think about building a positive data culture in an organization, what you're doing is, data needs to be as readily accessible as email. And so from that perspective, I think turning it into a cost model might be a way to accomplish it. I think it's more about a combination of leadership saying that we're just going to go there and it occurring at a grassroots where it's clear the value that it presents. And again, I re-emphasize this idea of a positive data culture.
We're going to sign off, but before we do, any advice for organizations? We've been talking at sort of a forward-looking level, things that will be happening, what to anticipate. What should an enterprise do now, perhaps, to put in place to anticipate what we've been talking about and therefore be in a more advantageous and ready position to jump on it, to execute when the time is right?
So I think the simplest advice I give is know that technology is not the biggest hurdle. It's change management and culture and leadership. And I think that when you think about the three strategies that I described, the data strategy integrated with the analytics strategy, that means you need to look at how you're organized and prioritized around that combined strategy. And then finally, when it comes to the data literacy strategy, is really what are you doing to enable your organization to see data as a positive asset to doing their jobs, and having the leadership understand that data translates into value and results. It's a tool, not a weapon.
Well, very good. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. You've been listening to a sponsored BriefingsDirect discussion on the impact of dispersed data in a multi-cloud world, and we've learned about the latest strategies for making the best use of data across the entire organization, technically in process terms as well as culturally. So I'd like to offer a big thank you to our guest. We've been here with Mike Potter, the Chief Technology Officer at Qlik. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And thank you as well to our audience for joining this BriefingsDirect Business Intelligence Trends discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host throughout this series of Qlik-sponsored BriefingsDirect interviews. Thanks again for listening. Please share this with your IT community and do come back next time.